If ever there was a category called the Theologian's Favorite Mystery Novelist, a serious contender would be Dorothy Sayers for her Lord Peter Wimsey series. Hi, my name is Terence and I'm your host for Reading and Readers, a podcast where I review Christian books for you. Today I review the Lord Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy Sayers, all 11 books reviewed in one episode. The first book, Whose Body, was published in 1923. That's 100 years ago. The widespread acclaim led to more and more books, and Dorothy Sayers ditched her advertising day job to be a full-time writer. The Lord Peter Wimsey series concludes in 1937 with Busman's Honeymoon, and I read all 11 books for today's review. Dorothy Sayers is a name that comes up often enough in the books I read. She seems to be a favorite for many theologians and Christian writers. But I didn't know anything about her, or felt in any way compelled to read her books until I listened to an Undeceptions episode. So that's a podcast by John Dixon, and he was interviewing Dr. Amy Orr Ewing, who studied Sayers for her PhD at Oxford University. To my utter disbelief, in her day, Dorothy Sayers was as famous, actually more famous, than Agatha Christie. Now, Christie is my favorite detective writer, so it shocked me to know that there was someone better than her. Perhaps the reason for Christie's longevity is because she continued churning out detective novels, while Sayers moved on to other things. Sayers put her writing talents to the drama of Christianity. She had the cheek in her time to put everyday English into the mouths of Jesus and the disciples. Many Christians protested, preferring their Savior to speak in King James English. In an essay titled The Greatest Drama Ever Staged, Sayers responded, "It's as if Christ wasn't born into history. He was born into the Bible, a place where nobody makes love or gets drunk or cracks jokes or talks slang or cheats or despises his neighbors. No wonder the story makes so little impression on the common man." Sayers wrote theological books, including The Mind of the Maker, which explores the nature of God and creativity. And there's another book titled Are Women Human?, which addresses the role of women in society. Sayers, by the way, was one of the first women to graduate from Oxford University. Recognizing the impact of her radio plays and books, the Archbishop of Canterbury wanted to award Sayers the prestigious Lambeth Doctorate of Divinity. She turned it down. Now, Dr. Amy, in that Undeceptions episode, suggested it's maybe somewhat because Sayers, the famous crime writer and public theologian, felt unworthy of the honor because she hid a secret sin. You see, Dorothy Sayers fell in love with a non-Christian who did not believe in marriage. Because of her faith, Sayers would not sleep with the man before marriage. Eventually, they separated because the man told her that he would not get married on principle. However, a few months later, that same man got married with another woman. Now, Dorothy Sayers was devastated because she really, really loved him. And later in her life, she got involved with another man, slept with him, got pregnant, and had a child who was then brought up by her cousin. Now, for more on Sayers, her life and work, please go to the Undeceptions episode. And one day I hope to review the books of Dorothy Sayers, the theologian. But for today, I will review the books of Dorothy Sayers, the crime writer. So let us now turn to the Lord Peter Wimsey mystery novel series. Having finished the series, I will say that the Lord Peter Wimsey series is to mystery novels as The Lord of the Rings is to fantasy novels. Surely not. Nobody knows Lord Peter Wimsey, so how can it be at the level of Lord of the Rings? Now, what I meant by that is that You can see Tolkien's Christian faith bleed into Middle-earth, making the epic story seem so real. In the same way, Sayers' faith bleeds into 20th century England and makes the people more real than the paper-thin characters that you read in books or watch on TV. Consider Agatha Christie's books, which are also set in post-World War I England. People go to church, they fundraise to repair the church roof, there is even a murder in the vicarage. But Christianity here is nominal. We are more likely to read the inner thoughts of a murderer, but we never read the inner thoughts of a believer. Whereas in Sayers' world, Christianity is overt. It's almost in your face. In chapter 3 of the first novel, Lord Peter Wimsey and Detective Charles Parker, are tracking a criminal through a little wood. Lord Peter says while he was tumbling through the woods, I quote, "I say, I don't think the human frame is very thoughtfully constructed for this sleuth hound business. If one could go on all fours or had eyes in one's knees, it would be a lot more practical." Parker replies, "There are many difficulties inherent in a teleological view of creation." End quote. When I read this, I was laughing out loud with delight. That is a line written by a theologian for readers who enjoy theology and mystery. Teleological view of creation, indeed. And by the way, this basically means that if God intended man to fly, God would have given him wings. And of course, that idea of creation has its difficulty because we can indeed fly. We just use different means. So anyway, explaining the joke makes it less funny. But reading these type of lines where you have that a theologian sense makes it very fun for me because again I don't get much of this from normal popular fiction. So I think that is why J.I. Packer and other theologians or Christian writers list Sayers among their favorites. Now, again, let me just say a bit more. How does Detective Parker relax after a long day of chasing murderers? I quote, "Parker was sitting in an elderly but affectionate armchair with his feet on the mantelpiece, relaxing his mind with a modern commentary on the epistle to the Galatians. He received Lord Peter with quiet pleasure, though without rapturous enthusiasm, and mixed him a whiskey and soda. Peter took up the book his friend had laid down and glanced over the pages. All these men work with a bias in their minds, one way or other," he said. "They find what they are looking for." Now listen to Parker's response. "Oh, they do, but one learns to discount that almost automatically, you know. When I was at college, I was all on the other side. Conybeare, Robertson, Andrews, and those people, you know, till I found they were all so busy looking for a burglar whose nobody had ever seen that they couldn't recognize the footprints of the household, so to speak. Then I spent 2 years learning to be cautious." Lord Peter then concludes, "Theology must be a good exercise for the brain." Reading Sayers is a good tickle for the theologian's brain. Now that conversation that you just heard essentially is about eisegesis, about the dangers of reading into the text what you want it to say. And Parker's response is a detective's rebuke to a theologian's fault. So again, I enjoy it. But having said that, it does not mean that the whole book is of this nature. I'm just picking out something unique that I don't get anywhere else. You still have the plot, you still have the murder, you still have the chasing down of the murderer, and they go through what you would expect from a detective book. I'm just picking out things that I thought was, again, this is after a Christian book review, so I just thought that these are things that might appeal to some of us. Let's look at another character. Miss Clemson is a spinster who helps Lord Peter dig things up. Okay, in the course of digging things up, in one of the stories, she strikes a conversation with a young lady about friendship. The young lady says, I quote, "A great friendship does make demands. It's got to be just everything to one. It's wonderful the way it seems to color all one's thoughts. Instead of being centered in oneself, one's centered in the other person. That's what Christian love means. One's ready to die for the other person." Miss Clemson replies, "Well, I don't know. I once heard a sermon about that from a most splendid priest, and he said that that kind of love might become idolatry if one wasn't very careful. He said that Milton's remark about Eve, he for God only, she for God in him, was not congruous with Catholic doctrine. One must get the proportions right, and it was out of proportion to see everything through the eyes of another fellow creature." End quote. Again, some things that make food for thought, a conversation in a murder mystery between a spinster digging up information from a possible witness. So again, a bit out of the ordinary. Another great strong character, I look forward to introducing her, is Harriet Vane. Harriet Vane. She appears in the novel Strong Poison. She first appears there. The character is, imagine this, the character is a writer of detective novels, and she was put on trial. So there's a bit of a meta narrative, I find. Like you're reading a story from a detective novel who is writing a story about a detective novel. So that makes it very surreal in some parts, but you haven't heard the rest. It gets more interesting. So anyway, in the story, we have Harriet Vane on trial for poisoning Philip Boyles. Now, Philip is a man in the story who does not believe in marriage. Harriet, in the story, agrees to live with him without marrying. Philip later changes his mind and decides to marry Harriet after all. At this, Harriet gets angry and breaks off the relationship. Was she angry enough to kill him, to poison him? So I got a chill when I saw this Harriet Vane about her life, because I know the secret life of Dorothy Sayers. And thus the whole novel suddenly became a meta-mystery. As there is the mystery in the book, there is another mystery about the book, which is, am I reading fiction or am I reading autobiography? So it was, again, for me, this is a very unique thing. I don't pretend that when I read Sherlock Holmes to know a bit more about Arthur C. Conan Doyle. When I read Hercule Poirot or Miss Marple, I don't ever think that I'm reading a bit of Agatha Christie. Maybe there is something behind the stories, but I just don't know. But here it is interesting because, and I'll tell you more later on, but there is quite a big part of Dorothy Sayers in her books. And these are, the names I mentioned, Parker, Miss Clemson, Harriet, they are side characters. And there are many more. I would love to talk about Bunter, the faithful servant. And I also like to, if I had more time, we could talk about the Wimsey family, his mother, his brother Gerald, the sister Mary, and they're all important in the series. And it's a lovely look at the family in that time. But I must now turn to Lord Peter Wimsey, the man himself. British detectives are like superheroes, so much so that Sherlock Holmes was acted out by both Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., and Doctor Strange, Benedict Cumberbatch. And if you just look at Sherlock Holmes, armed with his smoking pipe and far superior intelligence, Sherlock eventually catches his man and then says, "Elementary, my dear Watson." Now, in contrast, Lord Peter Wimsey has his monocle, a monocle that often gets ridiculed by the people that he meets. But if you take away his noble birth, his immense wealth, and his commendable service in the war, he would be a fairly ordinary man. There is no such sense of so superior, a godlike, I exaggerate, but a godlike, beyond mere mortal sort of intelligence that Sherlock Holmes tends to convey. In one case, it was not even Peter Wimsey who solved it. It's somehow the whole thing just ring the bell, and the case was solved. So he is less of a superhero, but that does not make him boring. If I could make a comparison, a helpful comparison, Lord Peter Wimsey reminds me of another famously rash and unpredictable Peter. No, I don't mean the Apostle Peter. I mean Peter Quill from Guardians of the Galaxy. And yes, it might be a bad idea to have watched that movie and do this review because I am in danger of reviewing both and neither. I just watched the third volume. So if you watch the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and don't worry if you don't, there is the first movie you see Peter Quill, and the story goes that despite every attempt, heroic attempts to stop Ronan the Accuser from landing on the planet, everything seems to be lost. The heroes are beaten, they're on the ground, and Ronan is really enjoying his victory speech. And then Peter does the coolest thing ever. And if you have never watched the movie, you should go watch it so that your jaw will just drop. And so there is that unpredictability even within the ordinariness of, if you know Peter Quill, he has no superpowers. He's not like the raccoon, Rocket Raccoon, or Gamora, or all these other characters. He is a very ordinary guy in a superhero group. So in a sense, Lord Peter Wimsey is also a very ordinary guy, but he is unpredictable. He is able to outsmart the people around him. He has some skills, but to me, he seems very ordinary. And in that ordinariness, deep inside him, beneath that devil-may-care cockiness, arrogance of the aristocrat, there is vulnerability. There is that naivety that endears him to the reader. You will like him. I mean, I would even say this: if I could choose one fictional detective to be a friend, if I could choose to have Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot or any other detective in TV and Bruce Wayne, if you like, I would choose as my friend Lord Peter Wimsey. He would make a great friend. He is funny, witty, unpredictable, loyal, and such a sensitive soul. So I really enjoy my journey reading through the 11 books because I felt like I got to know a friend because I saw him grow. And that's one of the nice things about this series. There are books like the Agatha Christie books and even the Sherlock Holmes books, the two ones that I'm more familiar with, where there is some growth. You do see recurring characters, but then there is no sense that there is an arc, a character arc. But with the Peter Wimsey books, if you're going to read it, I would suggest that you should read it from the beginning and read it in order so that you can get the character arc. Otherwise, you will miss out on the events, the occasions, the great occasions of their lives, the changes that happens, when we grow up, as we continue down this journey, the in-jokes and the callbacks to previous books. So just to take one example, all right, of the people that you may miss out on if you read it randomly. If you read it from the beginning, you will get to have a good sense of the Wimsey family and how they relate to each other, and how they resolve some of the conflicts, such that when you read them later on in the series, in other books, you know of them and you know how interesting the conversation can be. For one, let me just put to you, Gerald is the Duke, and he has a very slow sense of what Peter does. He doesn't approve of an aristocrat going around mucking about with a murder. So there's a bit of that class tension over there, what it means to be an aristocrat. So there's resentment, there's expectation, family expectation, honor, and so it makes for an interesting mix. Now you contrast that with Sherlock Holmes. We know he has a brother, Mycroft, but really, other than that freakish Holmes genes that creates this immortal geniuses, the brothers could just as well just be friends, colleagues, or even total strangers. The way they interact with each other is so boring in comparison. So, and that's the thing about the whole series. I mean, it's not just about the Peter Wimsey and Gerald Wimsey, about the Wimsey family. It's about everybody. All of them become more interesting as you read through. Parker, Clemson, Harriet, Bunter, and all the rest. So Lord Peter Wimsey just holds them together, they interact with him, and it's just a fun read. It makes it a compelling read because you just want to know what's going to happen to them in the next book. Now, having said that, there is one thing that could keep people away from the series or even just shut people off, all right? Just put people off when you read them. Now, the language is a bit harder. It is British in the 20th century, so 1920s. So it may be something that people are not used to. I mean, if you think about it, it's written 100 years ago. But that one is still doable, okay? The barrier is surpassable. A tougher one is that she brings us into worlds that you may not really want to go to. You know how kids complain about getting dragged by their parents to some place that they insist is fun, but it's not. Like, if they tell you going to a museum, oh, the museum is so great, so wonderful, and then you go to the museum and you're bored senseless. Now, in other detective books, the setting, the world is incidental. I mean, you go to Sherlock Holmes goes to a manor house somewhere, and it's a bit gloomy, and that's about it. You don't really care much about. It just sets the mood. But when Dorothy Sayers does it, she is actually building a world, and the world is very real to her. So when Dorothy Sayers sets the story in Oxford University, we get a sense of the buildings, the rivers, the dawns, the students, the ceremony. The world is very real and comes with all these details. In another book, the story is in an advertising agency. Again, we are immersed, whether you like it or not, into the nuts and bolts of advertising in 1920s England. Oh, by the way, did I mention that Sayers studied at Oxford University and she worked at an advertising agency? So she's writing what she knows. This is actually her life. And so sometimes she gives us all these details, in my opinion, that gets in the way of the plot. It makes the world more real. I can understand that, but I'm not the type of guy who enjoys world building so much so. Because sometimes she makes a reference, she quotes something, and I just don't understand because the world is just so far away from me that I just don't know what she's talking about in some cases. But having said that, even though there were moments that I would have normally given up, but because again of the characters, and I love and respect these characters, and I just want to see it through because of them. I want to see it through and see how they respond, how they triumph, and eventually how the whole series ends. So that's how strong the characters are to me. Now let me conclude this review by pitting Dorothy Sayers against her contemporary and, by today's standards, more successful writer Agatha Christie. I have read all of the Agatha Christie books, the Miss Marple, Hercule Poirot, and various others. Now, Agatha Christie wrote 66 detective novels, 6 times more than Sayers did for the Lord Peter Wimsey series. Now, here is the difference from a literature point of view, a literary critic point of view. Christie's books are plot-driven, whereas Sayers' books are character-driven. From a reader point of view, Christie generally has a gimmick. So her books are like, you have the ABC murders where the people are dying in the alphabetical order. You have the labors of Hercules. So the detective looks for cases that kind of corresponds to the classic Greek story of Hercules. You have The Murder in the Orient Express, which is very gimmicky as well, but I will not spoil it for you. So Sayers has that is Christie, Agatha Christie's. She has great ideas, great gimmicks, and keeps you on your toes for the entire book. What Sayers offers is not gimmicks, but characters. She has Wimsey, Bunter, Harriet, Clemson, and Parker. And in Christie, it's what will happen next. In Sayers, in Dorothy Sayers, it's what will he do? What is she thinking? How does he feel? So in Christie, the world ends when the case is solved. In Sayers, the world seems to carry on. So that's why, in a way, I find that if you enjoy Arthur C. Conan Doyle, if you enjoy Agatha Christie, I would say that the next book you should read is Dorothy Sayers, because it's a more grown-up book. Because it's not the focus is less on the gimmicks and more on character development. But anyway, to each his own. Of the 11 books, I like the early books. They successfully hooked me in, and I enjoyed getting to know this Lord Peter Wimsey. The books in the middle can be a bit hard going. I think Sayers became more confident in her writing skills and the ability to sell her books. So I think she expects the reader to be able to go the distance with her in her world building, the details and all that. I just want to say that the series ends well. This is important to me because nothing annoys me so much as having invested so much time, and then when you reach the final book and you're like, blah, this is such a lousy way to end a series. So the series ends well. I really enjoy, and there is a real sense of satisfaction. Okay, I don't want to spoil it, so I just say that there's a great sense of satisfaction, closure, such that you wish the characters well at the end of it, and hopefully the story can go on. That's a sense of it, that they continue living beyond the pages of the book. Sayers treats her characters with a lot of respect, and maybe that is because there's too much of her in them. She has her secret sin, her life in Oxford University, the work in the advertising agency. But for Christians, I would say that the unique experience here is that we get Dorothy Sayers, the nascent theologian. Okay, this is the budding theologian, and she is putting her faith into this world that she has made, and the characters are thinking about. Because if I said, if the obvious things like the university, the advertising agency, and living together with an unmarried man, if these are the obvious things, the overt parts, it also means that a lot of the themes, the questions, what is friendship, like I said just now, these are also being conveyed through the books, and I think those are the parts that make the book so much more interesting, as the characters just go back and forth in their lives, in their dialogues, as they pursue the murderer till the end. So there is a sense of pursuing truth just as they pursue the murderer. So I thought that was very interesting about this series, different from many of the books that I read. It's a world that comes alive through the characters, and it's so sincere how the story is told. This is a Reading and Readers review of the Lord Peter Wimsey series by Dorothy Sayers. I bought the 3-volume box set in Amazon Kindle for $100, and you might want to do the same. As we just heard from this episode, Detective Parker's hobby is to read a Bible commentary. And what do you know? For August this year, Logos is offering a free commentary on the letters of John. Now, this NIV application commentary is written by Gary M. Birch, and the series, I've read the series, and we have the whole entire series in the church library, so it's a great series, the NIV application commentary. and it's always accessible. It's just a fantastic series that is very fitting for the busy detective seeking to wind down after a hard day's work chasing murderers. And so I would say it's also a great series for you, dear listener. So this book is free. So I do hope that you will get it while it's still August, and hopefully I can find the time to actually read it and review it. But otherwise, I think that you will not be disappointed with this commentary. Alright, so that's the commentary on the Letters of John from the NIV Application Commentary written by Gary M. Birch. So that's free. Get it. Thanks for listening. Bye.